Good afternoon. My name is Ertharin, and I am a distinguished fellow of global food and agriculture at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Thank you all, and especially to our members for joining us via Zoom today for this On the Record program. If you'd like to submit a question to today's panel, please visit CCGA Live. As a reminder, the Council is a nonprofit, independent, and nonpartisan platform. The views expressed by individuals we host are their own and do not represent institutional positions or views of the Council. So let's get started. Former National Security Advisor Susan Rice said that when diverse and representative of the demographics of our country, America's foreign policy workforce is destined to produce more creative and alternative solutions. The Foreign Service represents the people and interest of the United States around the world, yet it is overwhelmingly white and male. Black Americans, Asians, Latinx, Native Americans represent 34% of the US workforce, yet in 2019, this group collectively represented less than 18% of career diplomats. For many generations, the US Foreign Service was aptly described as white, male, and Yale. According to agency data, approximately 81% of the department's Foreign Service officers are white. At a time Americans across the country and advocates across the world are examining the issues of systemic racism and inequity pervasive in so many of our domestic institutions here at home, it is also important to acknowledge that the United States diplomatic presence abroad continues to lack representative gender and racial diversity. But does a diverse diplomatic team matter for the success of US foreign policy and engagement? Is it important? If so, why is it important? These are among the questions we will explore with our panel today. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's speakers. First, Ambassador Barbara Bodine is a distinguished professor and the director of the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy of Georgetown's Walsh School of Foreign Service. Among her many assignments across a 33-year career, she served as the U.S. Ambassador to Yemen from 1997 to 2001, and as the Deputy Chief of Mission in Kuwait and Iraq. We're also joined by Ambassador Reuben Brigety. He is the Vice Chancellor and President at Sewanee, the University of the South. Previously, he was the Dean of the Elliott School of International Affairs at Georgetown University and
Washington University.
Washington University, let's get it right. There are a lot of alumni out there that were angry with me for that point. As the International Affairs at Georgetown University and served as the U.S. Ambassador at the African Union. He also served as task force co-chair for the Council's 2018 for Growth, a report on transforming economies through agriculture. Additionally, we are proud to be joined by Capricia Marshall, who serves as the President of Global Engagement Strategies and the Ambassador in Residence at the Atlantic Council. Previously, she served as White House Social Secretary in the Clinton administration and the U.S. Chief of Protocol in the Obama administration. Her new book, Protocol, The Power of Diplomacy and How to Make It Work for You, is available for purchase through our local partner, the bookseller. Thank you all for joining us today. So let's all get started with the question that I'd like you each to address. Why is it essential that our diplomats are not only racially, but as culturally diverse as the population of our country? Why does gender matter? And what impact does racial, gender, and cultural diversity have on US foreign policy and our engagement abroad? Let's start with you, Barbara.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the Council and I'd like to thank you for hosting this event. critically important, and I want to thank you for serving as our moderator today. And I would like to say to the ambassador that we would have been pleased to have you as our dean. But George Washington got him, not Georgetown. So if Wonks had football teams, we would have been arch rivals, but we would have had to throw position papers at each other. I think it is critically important that our foreign service, our government, reflect the diversity of our own country. And that's gender, that's race, that's its ethnicity, LGBTQ. But I think it's important to underscore that this diversity, while it's important on how we present ourselves to the world, it has another advantage that the more that we open up the foreign service to a diverse community of highly qualified people, the better our diplomacy will be. And only a few years ago, I did hear one of the more senior retirees talk about diversity being in opposition to meritocracy. And I had to stop him almost immediately. That diversity, a diverse foreign service, is actually the epitome of a true meritocracy, that we're able to recruit the very best from all segments of society and to bring their intellectual power and their ability, their innate and trained ability as diplomats to bear in the national interest. So it's important that we look like the country, but it's equally important, and I think a truly diverse and inclusive foreign service means that we have the opportunity for a better quality, more dynamic foreign service. We do bring our own different perspectives, and some of that can be geographic as well. The Mail, Pale, and Yale, pretty small fishbowl. And you need people from rural areas. You need people from even California. People who have grown up in poverty and people who have grown up in privilege. And so it's that diversity, that dynamic of perspectives. And then you need a recruitment and retention that once you've gotten them, they're there to be able to really represent us.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Barbara. And I'm going to come back to you on that question of retention. But let's go on to Brigady, Reuben, and your thoughts about why and if a diverse diplomatic corps is important.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's an honor. I thank the council for including me. Great American. It's an honor to be with you, and Capricia and Barbara, good friends both. It's good to serve on this panel with you. Let me first of all, I associate myself with everything that Barbara just said about why it's important, and let me add maybe just one or two other things. There's not another country on the planet that has had the history that we have had in terms of our foundations in white male supremacy. It's objectively true, based on who is privileged in our Constitution, who is not. And that has successfully evolved over 2 centuries to continue to broaden that idea of who is actually included, the full equality and understanding in our society. And that has broadened that aperture of inclusion to the point where we now have had an African American as president. We've had multiple women as secretaries of state. We've had multiple African Americans as secretaries of state. That's extraordinary. I mean, and on top of all of that, have a society that is a multicultural democracy that absolutely has had tensions. We're probably going through the most tense moment in the nature of our understanding of race and reconciliation, certainly in my lifetime. And yet, the promise of America, based on the ideals that we all claim to adhere to as Americans, is what allows us to continue to evolve. And crucially, as a matter of foreign policy, is one of the things that shows that to the world that we are qualitatively different when we get it right. We are not simply one other country that happens to have more economic and military power for the moment. There is something fundamentally different about the American story. And I would argue as well that that is why the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery launched protests around the world nearly simultaneously, the likes of which we have never seen. Because the world was demanding better of America, demanding that we actually live up to what we've been saying that we live up to. And so when we get it right, our ability to project that the strength of that multicultural democracy is absolutely one of the pillars of our power. The best ways to be able to demonstrate that is by who is representing America at the table. Now, let me say one other thing, and I know that we're going to get to this, but I also just want to allude to it as well. When you talked a little bit about retention. So, Barbara and I as educators are both in the business of actually increasing the pipeline of those who would conceive of the Foreign Service as a career. May not have had any history to it, may come from families or cultural backgrounds for whom even think about politics is as a luxury, as opposed to something else that may be more practical. The real issue isn't the entry on the pipeline. The real issue is promotion and retention. As I wrote in a foreign affairs article several years ago, there's not an agency in the national security establishment of the United States where the level of diversity at senior ranks is anywhere close to what it is at entry. And what that tells you is that women and people of color are treated at a higher level than white male. Now, unless you believe that women and people of color are inherently less competent than their white male counterparts, then something's wrong. Right? Logically, something is wrong, unless you think that that's exactly how the system is supposed to operate, and I don't believe that. And so we have to do some real soul searching and ask ourselves, what is amiss, so that our Foreign Service actually reflects the promise of America that it's meant to do.
Well, we will get back to that question, and we will also get back, I'd like to get back to you on the question of when America is at its best, and examples that you can give to us is where the diversity of our leadership made a difference when America was at its best at the table. Same question to you. Your thoughts. You sat from a very different chair during your time in two administrations, but were in both chairs you were very instrumental and very you were a very significant leader in the U.S. teams representing us abroad. So speak to this, the importance, if you believe it's important. Why?
Most definitively, I do. I join with others. It's such a great pleasure to join you, my dear friend, Ertharin. It's been far too long since I've seen you, and Ambassadors Bodine and Brigety, very, very honored to you as well. And a shout out to my dear friend, Matthew Porter, who's associated with your great organization. I couldn't agree more. Of course, it is important. And yes, I was quite honored to have served in a variety of capacities that showed me while I traveled with two different presidents around the world as they promoted the U.S. foreign policy agenda, just how important it was for them. That was part of my job, to make that they were at their top game of knowing and understanding the importance of cultural diversity, cultural diplomacy, and awareness. It is interesting. I also would like to affirm that I'm 100% aligned with what my colleagues here have stated already. There is a duty for diplomats. Their main objective when they set abroad is to create bridges of understanding. That is one of their objectives, is to bridge and also to persuade. We, our Foreign Service Officer is set out to promote peace around the world, and are also those supposed to support the U.S. foreign interests. And they do that by creating these relationships. When they have an understanding, their cultural IQ is at a level that they can convey these interests, that they can make these critical connections, it's incredibly important. And so it's not a head scratcher that we would need to have a foreign service contingency that is diverse of background, diverse of thought, diverse of opinion, diverse regionally, diversity in every aspect, because then they can represent our interests so much better. They can make those critical connections. And when they themselves, I mean, I've seen it time and again. One of the greatest examples, Linda Thomas Greenfield. She was a mentor of mine and set forth a wonderful example, not only for the career officers, but political appointees like myself. We walked in, and I say that sometimes we were treated a little bit like the Christmas help. Oh, here they come, to change everything. Well, I started off and I encouraged the entire team of political appointees that joined me. We have so much to learn from those career officers who have been serving those posts. The Lindas of the world, Ambassador Greenfield was extraordinary. And so I pushed our team to really engage with the career officers, the foreign and civil service officers, to learn from them, to gain, how we can be more effective in our positions. What sometimes is our objective, and how are we going about doing that? So they taught us political appointees the importance of creating those bridges of understanding, the importance of also bringing in political appointees who are diverse, not just, those from perhaps certain regions and certain backgrounds and, having a specific alignment with one race or another, to make sure that we too were supporting those who are already serving at the State Department with our own backgrounds. Because in the end, we all know when you have diversity of opinion, diversity of background, you come up with much better solutions, greater effort that brings about the foreign policy goals of the president.
And let me make a commercial announcement here for a moment before we go on, and thank all of the more than 100 plus people who are watching us today. That we appreciate you joining us. And to remind you, if you are interested in asking a question, type CCGA Live into your web browser and then type your question, and we're happy to take questions before we finish the program today. Let me come back to you, Barbara. You were an early member of the political cone, which for a very long time, as we all know, was that cone that was predominantly male and pale and Yale. And not only were you admitted into the political cone, but you rose through the ranks and to go on to serve as an ambassador in Yemen. And we've talked about, and Reuben alluded to this, and so did you, that question of retention, but you succeeding in navigating through. During a period of time when women didn't often make it past that first grade assignment. So what lessons did you learn and that you can offer to other women or our listeners today about how to succeed? And what does the department need to do differently to ensure that women and people of color succeed in moving through the pipeline?
I'll start off by saying that when I came into the Foreign Service, they had just instituted what we call the cone system. So there were women political officers before me, but I was the first to have the tag. Mm-hmm. I was also told, and there were 2 women in my orientation class, 2, not 2%, not 2. I was also told on my third day in the Foreign Service by the director of the orientation course that a mistake had been made, and that a woman couldn't be a political officer, and I needed to change. And I couldn't change being a woman, and I wasn't about to change being a political officer. And I did run into people like that. It wasn't until I'd been in the Foreign Service 10 years that I was not the only woman officer in whatever officer embassy I was in. It was, what I discovered was that for every jerk I ran into, and they're there, that there were 3 or 4 or 5 who were willing to be allies, who were really pushing to bring women in and to give us the kinds of jobs and opportunities that we needed. And the Foreign Service was going through a major change then. When I first came in, women could not get Russian, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, or Arabic. And we couldn't go to any hardship posts, which basically meant we had a very, very narrow career. And the Foreign Service, and I really want to underscore what Reuben said, we have always been a work in progress, the Department of State in the country. And I do see that 32% of senior officers are women, and that is maybe not an acceptable level. When I was an ambassador, it was 10%. And so I see the progress and I see the change. I think in terms of how you get through it is, a lot of it is holding on to why you're doing this job in the first place. Why did I want to be a diplomat? Why did I want to serve my country? Believing in yourself, sometimes when somebody is telling you to your face it, you're a mistake. I'm not very good with can't, shouldn't, won't. A friend of mine once described no as a long way to yes, and held on to that. So there's a lot of resilience, a lot of perseverance, a lot of stubbornness, a lot of learning how to negotiate diplomatically through your own bureaucracy. And as we all know, working very hard and understanding that, you know, you do have a different standard. And there was a point at which I also realized that it was important for me to stay with this so that younger women coming in could have the role model that I never had. And I want to go back to a point about what Reuben said in your first question on why it's important that we have diverse workforce, diverse diplomacy, is that it's also a signal to those people that we work with. When you're in a country where women are marginalized or minority groups are marginalized, ethnic groups are marginalized, and they see an American embassy that has people who have been traditionally marginalized, who are not part of the original Constitution, but are now part of the American political fabric. This makes a difference. They're not only able to see who we are, but they're actually also able to see who they are. And when I was ambassador to Yemen, Yemen appointed their first woman ambassador. Now, they didn't create her out of whole cloth because I showed up, but I gave some validation by me being the ambassador to her becoming an ambassador. And this is another point on why I think the diversity is important, because what it means, what it signals to others on what they can aspire to and what is possible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Then I very much appreciate that answer, Barbara. And I'm going to turn to you to ask. Barbara gave us a really good examples of what women can do and others can do to ensure their ability to move through the system. What should the institutions do differently to support the retention of of people of color and women.
Right. So let me actually start by saying, because you hear this a lot, the fact that, Barbara or Obama or whomever else, right? The fact that you see people of color and women succeed in non-traditional spaces where they either were not welcome or were legally or by policy prohibited doesn't mean that the nature of that bias is gone. It just demonstrates how amazing those people are who have succeeded, notwithstanding barriers, right? Which also goes to the second point, goes to what you say, nobody makes it alone. Nobody.
Right.
And so, broadly speaking, certainly with the State Department, but I think this is true in the military, it's true in other places, you have to do several things. The first is you have to be brave enough to have the conversation, right? So these issues of historic systemic bias, of sexism, of persistent racism, can be very hard to talk about, if for no other reason that it suggests that it implicates those who are in power of being somehow complicit. It may not be true, it probably is less true than previously, but still, right? I mean, they're hard. And so we have to have a sense of collective courage and compassion when we are having them, but we have to have them, because to not have them is complicit. So that's that. The second is that if I were, say, the chief of naval operations, or I was director general of the Foreign Service or whatever, I would want to track every single person and require an interview, or require an interview with anytime anybody has an adverse, fitness report or whatever, to try to understand what the heck is happening. I'll give you a very good example of this. Colin Powell, one of my heroes, inarguably one of the greatest public servants our country's ever had. If you read his 1995 biography, he talks about how the Army for him was such a meritocracy, and how, as a lieutenant and a captain and a young major and up through colonel, he had kept on having more and more responsibilities, and he was doing great up until he became a one-star general. He became an assistant division commander at Fort Carson, Colorado. And he had a 2-star division commander who just really hated him. We don't know why precisely. He didn't, right? And gave this water-walking, brand new 1-star African-American general essentially a bad fitness report, which was the kiss of death to his career. And so he was like, it's over, right? It's just over. Until a 3-star general, African-American, Julius Becton, went and visited that division and saw what a horrible command climate it was, and recognized that the only person who had the guts to stand up to that 2-star division commander was a young 1-star ADC, General Powell, and literally pulled his career out of the fire and set him back on track. And thus we now have Colin Powell, and no division commander was. And so what I can tell you, just anecdotally, from my conversation with friends who are women or who are people of color in the military, in the Foreign Service, elsewhere, is that kind of thing happens more often than not, and it stops promising careers in their tracks. Which doesn't mean, right, that somebody is not performing, right? But it does mean that we have to ask the question, given that it's so hard, and also, as I say, given this systemic pattern, right? Unless you believe that women and minorities are just inherently worse, we need to pull the thread on every single person and ask what's going on. The Army just this week decided that they were going to get rid of photos and may get rid of names when they're reviewing officer records for promotion, because of their concerns of what may be just this inherent implicit bias. My favorite example of this. So, naval officer, went to the Naval Academy. I have enormous respect for the United States Marine Corps. Amazing organization, hardest core warriors on the planet. Of all the 4 armed services under the Department of Defense, the Marine Corps is the only one that has had exclusive white men at the 4-star level. Only one. All the services desegregated at the same time. They basically all lifted the combat exclusion law at the same time for women. And so that is inexplicable. We could actually be going on a point where the Marine Corps, just given how long it takes to grow an officer generally, especially a 4-star, we for sure will get to 75 years beyond this integration of the armed forces. It could be a century before the Marine Corps ever has an African-American 4-star or a 4-star of any other color. There's something wrong with that. There's something systemically wrong with that picture. Because again, unless you believe there's just never been an African-American Marine who's tough, which is essentially the Corps' argument, right? Because if they argue that it's all been fair, no, only color Marines see are green, then how does that happen? Mm-hmm. And again, I simply say that you have to take the problem seriously, and most importantly, just like it's hard for individuals, it's hard for institutions. You have to look yourself hard in the eye, in the mirror. Mm-hmm. Yourselves, maybe the problem is not with the individuals. Maybe there's something wrong with our institution that we need to correct. And that takes leadership.
And so that kind of leadership that you've just identified in Reuben. Capricia, I want to go to our questions from the audience and ask you a related question. Can you speak about an institution and where the pipeline into the Foreign Service, if the pipeline into the Foreign Service Organization is diverse, but falls off very quickly within the ranks, what more can the State Department do about this? Let's not take that one, because Reuben just did a great job of answering that one.
He did.
Let's do this one. Do you know of an organization, public or private, has done a better job of enabling the diversity of entrants to be reflected at more senior levels? Can you think about an institution?
Golly, that's a tough one to really hammer through. First, I want to apologize. I have been saying that during these virtual meetings, test your tech, and I did all that, and it zappoed. So now I'm holding my phone up, always prepared. I find I wanted to also, just if I could very quickly, Ertharin, comment a little bit about what Barbara was just saying, what Barbara had said earlier about women, and women in particularly at state. She was held up as one of the just extraordinary examples that people were awe of her work, and she's legendary, frankly. And it was because she stood there with just one other woman beside her. It was because she pushed the limits. It was because she didn't take what was standard answer, or this is just how it's done. She pushed back, and she paved the way for thousands of other women in particularly, and I would have to say also people of diverse backgrounds to make their way through the door as well. And so it's important when you have those firsts that are out there who are really making the push. In my bureau, the women who joined me were of so many different backgrounds and added so much value to the foreign policy agenda of President Barack Obama around the world. So I just wanted to say about her and say thank you. Thank you so very much for what you did so bravely years ago. It is hard to find these institutions that are diverse because they're so ingrained in their organizational methodology, and the people who are making the decisions are those who have been there for years and are of a certain background and of a certain mindset and are unwilling, unless pushed often, to make those necessary changes. I mean, Ambassador Brigety has said it time and again, are we saying that there's a certain type of person that is not qualified? No, of course we know that's not the case. We know that they're qualified. It's just that change is afoot today, but it has been long in coming. And so unless you have the Ambassador Bodines and the Ambassador Brigites, who are pushing those institutions, forcing them to make those changes when it comes to women and people of color. They're going to stay in the same mindset. They're going to continue along making the decisions that they are making because, you know, we have an applicant or two and we've been reaching out, and we have a program that actually requests or is defined that we must accept diverse applicants. You know, it's I have one of those in my house too. But you know, I dare say that I find it very hard to think of another agency in the government that has been pushing those limits. And today we're going to see it. We're going to see it in abundance.
Well, Capricia, I think you're generous in your comments for Barbara, but I know from personal experience that you too were quite instrumental in bringing along lots of women, particularly young women, into the department. Going back to the questions that have been asked, and first I'll go to you, Barbara. This is the question that has the most requests for us to answer it. What recommendations do you have for students of color or women who are interested in public policy and international affairs, that those that are interested in the foreign service but do not have a lot of experience in this field? You spoke about those without background. Reuben mentioned those without family who don't have experience in this field. What advice would you offer to students who see you on the screen, hear about your career, and say, I want to do what she's done?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I need to say I'm a first in family, college, much less graduate school, much less the foreign service. And I grew up in the west of the San Fernando Valley, for anybody who knows California. So I didn't have a lot of direct contact. I didn't get to do the internship and all those other things. I want to circle back to the one point that was made earlier. It's not a generational problem. You know, my career, every career is on the shoulders of giants and others who reach down to help you pull up. The problem that I see with the department now is, first of all, an utter lack of leadership on these issues. You know, we have 3 African-American ambassadors. You could throw darts at a dartboard and get a better number than that. It doesn't even come up to random. Under the end of the Obama administration, we had 6 women assistant secretaries of state. We have none. And so it's a top-down leadership issue. But we also have a problem of we have a climate change that we need to actually encourage. There is still a climate of the country club to which none of us would be given full membership. And that climate needs to change. One of the things I have found the most depressing is not what I went through to stay. It's the retention issue. It's the leaky pipeline in the department. And it's because there is still this culture of everyone who is on this Zoom call would be allowed in as a favor. And that there are younger white men who have attitudes that, to be honest, the men that I worked for when I was a junior officer would have been embarrassed to hold. Mm-hmm. And women having to go through harassment that I put up with because, I'm sorry, that was the world then. Mm-hmm. I didn't like it, and I didn't actually put up with it, but I expected it. They're still going through the same thing. That's wrong. In terms of what students who want to come in, first, I very much encourage you. Get the best education you can wherever you can go. Get real work experience. Grow up. It's a tough job. And really get into what are U.S. interests? What is the world about? How do you build relationships? And thank you for your book on that. And persevere. Most people don't get into the Foreign Service on their first try with the exam. It's hard. I know one very credible, well-known ambassador who took the exam 7 times. I do not have that level of perseverance. Fortunately, I didn't have to go that far. But it's a question of getting yourself prepared. And it can be work experience in any service, AmeriCorps, Peace Corps. If you can work at a think tank or something, wherever you are. If you can't come to Washington for an internship, there's a very nice council in Chicago and San Francisco and Ventura County, California. Get the exposure. Find a way to get out of whatever bubble you were raised in. And it can be a privileged bubble or an unprivileged bubble. But get out and learn who you are. Learn what your values are. Learn what is important to you. And then know your stuff intellectually. And with that, you can do it.
And so,
can I add just a moment, just a small note to what Barbara said there, because I think everything that she said was just so incredibly important. But I wanted to add that mentorship is so very important as well. And at the State Department, I was, even at the age that I entered, not so youthful, I sought out great mentors. I was lucky in having one with Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State. But I also then sought out those people that I thought would be great mentees. And so when you do step into that job, if you do get that opportunity to get there, seek those people out who will give you great judgment, who will be honest with you, who usually have great resources and will share them with you. They are on the branch higher than yours, and they see the world in a very different way and can be invaluably helpful in your career path.
Yeah. Let me just quickly, a small thing on that is that if you are coming from someplace outside of Washington and you're not in the department yet, find that mentor in high school, find that mentor at your college who can work with you and help you develop who you are. Don't wait till you get to the department because you might not get there. Find those mentors, particularly if you're a first in family, particularly if you're far from Washington and the East Coast. Find those people who will help you. They're there.
Finding the people. Reuben, you're going to get our last word today. Not just on the how do you get there, but why should young, talented people of color and women pursue careers in foreign policy? You've heard all the negatives about the department. Why should we encourage more diverse leadership and more diverse participation particularly from our talented young people out there?
Let me answer the questions on 2 sides of the coin. So first of all, if you don't remember anything else I've said today, remember this. You cannot have a more diverse institution if white men don't buy into it. You just can't. Because they are the ones who are predominantly in power. They also have to be the ones who are committed to diversity. And I have thrilled, I could spend an hour naming just some wonderful mentors who are white men who really believe in it. And I think that's a great thing. So that's important. On the other side, why should people of color or women and people that are from non-traditional backgrounds consider this? There are 2 reasons. One, it's a marvelous thing.
Yeah.
A marvelous thing to be able to serve your country by getting to know the rest of the people of the world and to build bridges and to try to find ways to get to yes on some very knotty, thorny, challenging issues. And the other side is that even if you don't stay forever in the Foreign Service, it is fantastic training for anything else you want to do. So I can tell you, as a vice chancellor, first African-American vice chancellor of the University of the South, I'm using the diplomatic tools that I used in Addis Ababa every single day. And so it's like the gift that keeps on giving professionally and personally.
Well, thank you for that answer. Whether it's having mentors or leaders, I think that our entire panel will agree that the opportunity to serve in representing your country is like no other. And so it is good that we speak to the why of the diversity, but the importance of the participation of diverse and leaders from around our country. And so I want to thank you all for joining us today for this conversation, because you all represent the best that America has had in the service of our diplomatic corps, and we can all learn from your experiences. To our audience today, I thank you very much for joining us, and I invite you to support the Council today. The Council will help continue to provide timely global affairs content. Membership starts as cheap as $100 and allows you entry to members-only programs and more. So go to www.ChicagoCouncilOrganization.com/donate to make your contribution today. And continue to join us for these types of dialogues that we continue to offer during this period when America reimagines how we grow back better as we address the challenge of COVID, overcome the issues that have been laid bare by George Floyd, and continue to serve not only internationally, but to the conversations that are necessary for us as a country to continue to improve domestically. Thank you for your participation today. My name is Ertharin Cousin. I appreciate you all for being here. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.